Hey everyone, welcome back to Try Not to Sleep. I'm your host, Ethan Brooks, and as always, we're here with another calm, slightly boring story from history to help you unwind. Tonight, we will be talking about the real story behind Roswell and the decades of confusion and secrecy that followed the 1947 incident. All right. Get comfortable, and let's see how far you make it before you fall asleep. War Thunder, an online military game, sponsored the investigation and retelling of the Roswell incident and related UFO events. The game is known for its detailed representations of historical military vehicles, including aircraft from the 1940s. War Thunder's support allowed researchers and historians to access archives, interview witnesses, and examine declassified documents related to the events of 1947. With this backing, more attention was given to the technical details of the sightings and the military response. The sponsorship enabled the creation of accurate visualizations of the aircraft and radar systems used by the Army Air Forces at the time. This included the radar equipment at Roswell Army Airfield, which tracked the unidentified objects on July 1st, 1947, during the severe lightning storm in New Mexico. Researchers reconstructed the timeline of events using military records, flight logs, and official statements. War Thunder's involvement made it possible to compare the reported speeds and maneuvers of the unidentified objects with the known capabilities of 1940s aircraft. The findings confirmed that the speeds described by Kenneth Arnold and the radar operators at Roswell were beyond what was possible for any military plane of that era. The sponsorship also supported interviews with surviving witnesses and experts. Stanton Friedman, who became known as the flying saucer physicist, was able to share his research with a wider audience. Dr. Robert Wood, who had worked on classified UFO studies for McDonnell Douglas, contributed technical analysis of the debris described by Jesse Marcel and others. War Thunder's resources helped document the recovery process at the Roswell crash sites. This included the transport of debris and bodies to military bases, the security measures taken by the Army, and the efforts to control the flow of information. The game's historical focus highlighted the military protocols and secrecy that shaped the public's understanding of the incident. Through War Thunder's support, the story of Roswell and the birth of the flying saucer phenomenon reached new audiences, grounded in the details of military history and eyewitness accounts. In 1947, American military technology was advancing quickly. The Army Air Forces operated new radar systems and high-speed aircraft, but nothing in service matched the speed or flight characteristics reported near Mount Rainier or Roswell. Kenneth Arnold's sighting described objects flying faster than any known plane, with movements unlike conventional aircraft. His description of saucer-like motion led to the term flying saucer, which spread rapidly through newspapers and radio. The Roswell Army Airfield used radar to track unidentified blips during the July 1 lightning storm. Radar operators noted the objects moved too quickly and erratically for standard explanations. At the same time, Project Mogul was underway, involving high-altitude balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The Army later claimed Roswell debris was from one of these balloons, but initial reports described materials that seemed unfamiliar, such as thin, lightweight metal that returned to its original shape after being crumpled. Military protocols dictated strict secrecy. Officers secured the debris field, posted guards, and removed civilians. Witnesses like rancher Mac Brazel were detained and questioned. The Army released a press statement announcing the recovery of a flying disc, but reversed this within hours, replacing the story with a weather balloon explanation. Debris was shipped to Fort Worth and Washington, D.C., under heavy guard. The public's imagination responded quickly. Newspapers and radio broadcasts repeated the term flying saucer, fueling speculation about extraterrestrial visitors. Reports of other sightings increased, with over 300 UFO reports in New Mexico alone that summer. Researchers like Stanton Friedman and Dr. Robert Wood examined military records and interviewed witnesses, noting the gap between official explanations and eyewitness accounts. Military secrecy and rapid technological change made it difficult for the public to separate fact from rumor. The combination of unusual debris, official denials, and widespread media coverage created a lasting fascination with UFOs and flying saucers in American culture. After the events of 1947, reports of unidentified flying objects increased across the United States. Newspapers published dozens of articles about sightings, often using the term flying saucer. The Air Force received hundreds of written reports from civilians, pilots, and military personnel. In response, the Air Force created Project Sign in 1948 to investigate these incidents. Project Sign analysts collected sighting data, interviewed witnesses, and compared reports to known aircraft and weather phenomena. In 1949, Project Sign became Project Grudge Diked. The new project aimed to debunk UFO reports and reduce public concern. Investigators attributed most sightings to weather balloons, astronomical objects, or misidentified aircraft. However, some cases remained unexplained. In 1952, the Air Force established Project Blue Book, a larger and more systematic investigation. Project Blue Book operated until 1969 and reviewed over 12,000 UFO reports. About 700 cases were classified as unexplained. During this period, several high-profile sightings attracted national attention. In July 1952, radar operators and pilots reported multiple unidentified objects over Washington, D.C. The Air Force scrambled jet fighters, but the objects maneuvered away at high speed. The incident led to a press conference by Major General John Samford, who stated that most sightings could be explained, but some remained mysterious. Civilian organizations also became involved. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP, formed in 1956. NICAP collected reports and lobbied for congressional hearings. Scientists such as Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer at Northwestern University, served as consultants to the Air Force. Hynek initially dismissed most sightings, but later concluded that some cases deserved further study. By the late 1960s, public interest in UFOs was widespread. Books, magazines, and television programs featured eyewitness accounts and government documents. The Air Force ended Project Blue Book in 1969, stating that UFOs posed no threat to national security. Despite this, reports and speculation about aerial mysteries continued. Kenneth Arnold's flight, June 24, 1947. On June 24, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot and businessman from Boise, Idaho, took off from Chehalis, Washington. He was flying his Calair II, a small single-engine plane, on a business trip. His route took him past Mount Rainier, the highest peak in Washington state. Arnold was searching for a missing Marine Corps transport plane that had crashed in the area. At approximately 3:00 p.m., Arnold noticed a bright flash of light to his left. He looked out and saw a series of 9 objects flying in a formation. The objects were moving from north to south, roughly parallel to the mountain range. Arnold estimated that the objects were at an altitude of about 9,500 feet, and he was flying at around 9,200 feet. Arnold described the objects as being flat, thin, and disc-like, with no tails or obvious means of propulsion. He said they reflected sunlight with a blinding intensity. The objects appeared to move erratically, dipping and flipping as they traveled. Arnold later compared their motion to a saucer skipping across water. Arnold timed the flight of the objects between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams, a distance of about 50 miles. He calculated their speed at over 12,200 miles per hour, far faster than any known aircraft at the time. Arnold was an experienced pilot and familiar with military planes, but he could not identify what he had seen. After landing in Yakima, Washington, Arnold reported the sighting to local authorities and the press. His description quickly spread through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Reporters focused on his comparison to a saucer, and the term flying saucer entered popular language. Arnold's sighting marked the beginning of the modern era of UFO reports in the United States. After Kenneth Arnold's report, other witnesses began describing similar objects in the skies. Many accounts mentioned discs or oval shapes with no visible tails, wings, or engines. Newspapers published dozens of new sightings within days of Arnold's flight. Pilots, civilians, and even military personnel described objects that moved quickly and changed direction abruptly. On July 1, 1947, radar operators at Roswell Army Airfield in New Mexico tracked fast-moving objects during a severe lightning storm. The radar blips showed speeds and flight paths that did not match any known aircraft. The objects appeared and disappeared from the radar screen without explanation. At the same time, several people in New Mexico reported seeing strange lights and metallic objects in the sky. Rancher Mac Brazel found unusual debris on his property near Corona, New Mexico. The material was thin, strong, and lightweight. Brazel noticed that when he crumpled the metal, it returned to its original shape. He collected samples and brought them to the local sheriff, who contacted the military. Army intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel and counterintelligence officer Sheridan Cavett visited Brazel's ranch to examine the debris field. They collected pieces of metal, foil, and small beam. Marcel later described the metal as unlike anything he had seen before. He said it could not be cut, burned, or bent permanently. Witnesses at the site observed that the debris had no markings of American or Soviet origin. Some pieces included symbols that resembled hieroglyphics. The Army quickly secured the area and warned civilians to remain silent. Soldiers loaded the debris into crates and transported it to Roswell Army Airfield. The military issued a press release stating they had recovered a flying disc. Within hours, the Army retracted the statement and claimed the debris was from a weather balloon. Despite the official explanation, reports of objects without tails continued throughout the summer of 1947. These sightings fueled public interest and speculation about the nature of the flying saucers. Birth of the flying saucer. The term flying saucer began with Kenneth Arnold's description of the objects he saw near Mount Rainier on June 24, 1947. Arnold told reporters the objects moved like a saucer skipping across water. Journalists focused on this phrase, and headlines across the country began using flying saucer to describe any unidentified disc-shaped object in the sky. Within days, newspapers reported dozens of new sightings. Witnesses from Oregon, Texas, and New Mexico described seeing shiny disc-like objects moving at high speeds. Pilots and military personnel also submitted reports, noting the lack of wings, tails, or visible engines on these craft. The Army and Air Force received hundreds of written statements and phone calls about strange objects in the sky. The sudden surge in sightings led to increased military scrutiny. Bases across the country received orders to report unusual aerial activity. Intelligence officers began collecting and cataloging witness statements, photographs, and radar data. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened files on several incidents, including the Roswell case. At Roswell, the Army's initial press release used the phrase flying disc, which matched the public's new terminology. The quick retraction and replacement with the weather balloon story did little to calm speculation. Some witnesses, including Major Jesse Marcel, continued to describe the debris as unique and unidentifiable. Reports of hieroglyphic-like symbols on some pieces added to the mystery. By July 1947, the phrase flying saucer was widely recognized in American culture. Radio shows, magazines, and comic strips featured stories about the mysterious discs. The military's secrecy and conflicting statements only increased curiosity. The events of that summer established the flying saucer as a permanent part of American vocabulary and set the stage for future investigations into unidentified flying objects. On July 1, 1947, a severe lightning storm swept across central New Mexico. The storm produced heavy rain, strong winds, and frequent lightning strikes. That evening, radar operators at Roswell Army Airfield monitored the storm's progress. During the storm, their radar screens displayed several fast-moving, unexplained blips. The objects appeared suddenly, traveled at high speed, and then vanished from the screen. The operators noted the blips did not match the flight patterns or speeds of known aircraft. At the same time, several residents in the area reported seeing unusual lights in the sky. Some described bright flashes that did not resemble normal lightning. Others claimed to see metallic objects moving against the dark clouds. The combination of radar data and visual sightings drew the attention of military intelligence officers at the base. The following morning, rancher Mac Brazel discovered debris scattered across his property near Corona, about 75 miles northwest of Roswell. The debris field stretched several hundred yards. Brazel examined the material and found it to be thin, lightweight, and unusually strong. He noted that pieces of the metal would crumple in his hand, but return to their original shape when released. The material did not burn or break, even under significant force. Brazel collected samples and traveled to the nearby town of Roswell to report his findings. He spoke with Sheriff George Wilcox, who contacted Roswell Army Airfield. Major Jesse Marcel and counterintelligence officer Sheridan Cavett were assigned to investigate. They accompanied Brazel to the site and began collecting debris for analysis. Military personnel quickly secured the area. Soldiers posted guards and restricted access to the debris field. The Army instructed Brazel and other local witnesses not to discuss what they had found. The debris was loaded into crates and transported back to the base for further examination. The military's swift response signaled the seriousness with which they regarded the incident. At Roswell Army Airfield, radar operators continued to monitor the skies following the lightning storm. On July 2 and July 3, Radar screens again showed fast-moving, unexplained blips. These anomalies appeared suddenly, traveled in straight lines, and then disappeared without warning. The operators recorded the data and reported the incidents to base command. Major Jesse Marcel, the base intelligence officer, reviewed the radar logs. He noted that the object's speeds and flight paths did not match any scheduled military or civilian flights. The blips moved faster than any known aircraft in the area. Marcel discussed the findings with Colonel William Blanchard, the base commander. Blanchard ordered increased aerial surveillance and instructed radar crews to report all unusual activity immediately. On July 4th, a second, more intense lightning storm struck the region. During this storm, radar operators detected several more anomalies. The blips appeared in the same general area as before, northwest of the base, near the debris field. Some operators believed the objects were responding to the storm's electrical activity, but there was no clear explanation. The base received multiple civilian reports of strange lights and objects in the sky. On the night of July 4th, witnesses described bright flashes and metallic shapes moving rapidly above the clouds. Some reports mentioned two objects appearing to collide or descend rapidly toward the ground. Military patrols were dispatched to search the area. Soldiers combed the countryside for additional debris or signs of a crash. The Army coordinated with local law enforcement to gather civilian reports and restrict access to the search zone. Aerial reconnaissance flights were launched at first light on July 5 to survey the region from above. The continued radar anomalies, combined with eyewitness accounts and physical debris, convinced Roswell Army airfield officials that the situation was unusual and required further investigation. The base maintained a high level of alert as the search for answers continued. On July 5, 1947, Roswell Army Airfield intensified its investigation. Patrols were expanded, and additional personnel were assigned to monitor radar screens around the clock. Officers reviewed the radar logs from the previous nights and found consistent patterns in the unexplained blips. The blips appeared in the same region northwest of the base, often during periods of electrical storms. Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett returned to the debris field with a larger team. Soldiers marked the area with stakes and cordoned it off to keep civilians away. They collected more pieces of debris, including thin sheets of metal, lightweight beams, and fragments with strange symbols. The material was carefully packed into crates and loaded onto military trucks. At the same time, Rancher Mac Brazel was escorted to the base for questioning. He was held incommunicado and was not allowed to contact his family or the press. Officers questioned Brazel about the time and manner of his discovery. They asked for precise details about the debris and the weather conditions on the night of the storm. Reports of additional sightings continued to reach the base. Civilians in Roswell and nearby towns described seeing military convoys moving through the area at night. Some reported seeing bright lights in the sky and hearing low-flying aircraft. A few witnesses claimed to see soldiers recovering strange-looking objects from remote locations. The growing number of reports increased suspicion among the officers at Roswell Army Airfield. Colonel Blanchard ordered all findings to be classified and restricted access to the debris. He instructed his staff to prepare a press release announcing the recovery of a flying disc, but also directed that no further statements be made without his approval. By July 6, the base was operating under strict security. Military police were posted at all entrances. All personnel involved in the recovery signed non-disclosure agreements. The combination of radar evidence physical debris, and mounting civilian reports, led the Army to treat the incident as a matter of national security. On the morning of July 3, 1947, Mac Brazel, a rancher living near Corona, New Mexico, rode out to check on his sheep after the previous night's storm. He noticed his animals were avoiding a section of his pasture. When he investigated, he found a large area scattered with unusual debris. The field was littered with small metallic pieces, thin strips, and fragments resembling foil. Some pieces were as light as paper, but could not be torn or burned. Brazel also found small beams with strange, raised markings that did not resemble any language he recognized. Brazel collected several samples and brought them back to his ranch house. He tried to cut, dent, or burn the material, but it resisted all effort. When he crumpled the foil-like metal, it returned to its original shape. The debris did not rust or show signs of weathering. Brazel discussed the discovery with his neighbors, Floyd and Loretta Proctor. They advised him to report it to the authorities. On July 6th, Brazel traveled to Roswell and contacted Sheriff George Wilcox. Wilcox examined the debris and decided to notify the Roswell Army Airfield. Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett were dispatched to meet Brazel. That afternoon, Brazel led them to the debris field. Marcel and Cavett spent several hours examining and collecting material. They noted the area covered several hundred yards and contained no large wreckage, only scattered fragments. The officers loaded the debris into their vehicles and returned to the base at dusk. Brazel was taken into military custody and questioned about his discovery. He was not allowed to contact his family or speak to the press. The Army instructed him to remain silent about the incident. The military began to secure the site, posting guards and restricting access to the area. Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett transported the collected debris to Roswell Army Airfield. Once inside the base, they presented the materials to Colonel William Blanchard and other senior officers. The officers examined the debris closely. They observed that the metal pieces were extremely thin, almost like foil, but much stronger than any household material. Attempts to cut, tear, or burn the metal failed. The material resisted all standard tools and remained intact. When crumpled by hand, the metal would return immediately to its original flat shape. It showed no creases or signs of stress. Some fragments were as light as paper, yet they could not be permanently bent or folded. Other pieces included small, rigid beams. These beams were lightweight and displayed unusual markings. Witnesses described the symbols as similar to hieroglyphics, though no one could translate or identify them. The officers also tested the debris for magnetic properties. The metal did not respond to magnets and did not conduct electricity in the usual way. Laboratory technicians at the base attempted to analyze the composition. Their tests revealed that the material did not match any known military or civilian alloy. It did not rust, corrode, or react to acids. The Army ordered the debris to be packed into sealed crates. Military police guarded the crates at all times. The material was then loaded onto a B-29 aircraft for transport to Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. At Fort Worth, General Roger Ramey and his staff inspected the debris. Photographs were taken of some pieces, but the original material was quickly replaced with parts from a standard weather balloon for public display. The unusual properties of the original debris were noted by all who handled it. Despite extensive testing, the Army could not identify the source or composition of the material. The findings were classified and further analysis was conducted at other military laboratories. The resilient, lightweight metal remained a central mystery in the Roswell incident. On July 8, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield Public Information Office issued an official press release. The statement, authorized by Colonel William Blanchard, announced that the Army had recovered a flying disc from a ranch near Roswell. The press release was distributed to local radio stations and newspapers, including the Roswell Daily Record and Associated Press. News of the Army's announcement spread quickly across the United States. Headlines in major newspapers reported the recovery of a flying saucer by the military. Shortly after the release, reporters began calling the base for more information. Officers at Roswell Army Airfield confirmed that debris had been recovered and was being sent to higher headquarters for examination. The Army stated that the object was found by a local rancher and brought to the base by intelligence officers. The initial announcement did not mention the type of material or any details about its construction. Within hours, the story reached General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. General Ramey ordered the debris flown to his base for further inspection. Major Jesse Marcel accompanied the shipment. Upon arrival in Fort Worth, the military allowed photographers to take pictures of the debris. The material shown to the press consisted of tinfoil, rubber, and sticks, resembling the remains of a weather balloon. General Ramey held a press conference and retracted the earlier statement. He explained that the recovered debris was not a flying disc, but rather a weather balloon used for meteorological purposes. The Army replaced the original story with this new explanation. The press published the Army's revised statement, and headlines changed from flying disc to weather balloon. Despite the retraction, the initial announcement remained in the public's mind. The rapid change in the Army's story led to confusion and speculation. The details of the debris and the reasons for the reversal were not explained to the public. The incident continued to generate questions and interest from both the media and the general population. Army retracts flying disc claim. After the initial announcement, the Army moved quickly to change the official story. On July 8, 1947, General Roger Ramey at Fort Worth Army Airfield summoned Major Jesse Marcel and the debris for a press conference. Photographs were taken of Marcel and Ramey with pieces of material on the floor. The displayed debris included tinfoil, rubber, and wooden sticks, all resembling parts of a standard weather balloon and radar reflector. General Ramey told reporters that the original report of a flying disc was a mistake. He stated that the recovered object was nothing more than a weather balloon used for meteorological research. The Army distributed this new explanation to news agencies across the country. The Associated Press, United Press, and other outlets updated their stories to reflect the Army's retraction. The Roswell Daily Record published a follow-up article clarifying the Army's position. Military spokesmen emphasized that there was no evidence of a disc or any unusual aircraft. They insisted the debris was ordinary and posed no threat. At Roswell, Colonel William Blanchard ordered the debris field secured and all remaining material collected. Military police guarded the site, and civilians were kept away. Mac Brazel, the rancher who found the debris, was held by the Army for several days. He was not allowed to speak freely to reporters. When Brazel was finally released, he gave a new statement to the press. His account now matched the Army's weather balloon explanation. Other witnesses were also instructed not to discuss what they had seen. The Federal Communications Commission warned local radio stations, including KEFL, not to broadcast interviews about the incident. The Army removed all debris from the site and transported it to military facilities for further analysis. The official story remained that the object was a weather balloon. The Army's retraction ended public discussion in the press, but many people remained skeptical about the true nature of the Roswell debris. The Roswell Army Airfield's original press release on July 8, 1947, triggered immediate national attention. News agencies across the United States picked up the story within hours. The Associated Press and United Press International sent bulletins to major newspapers and radio stations. Headlines in large cities, including Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, announced that the Army had recovered a flying disc. Radio broadcasters interrupted regular programming to report the news. Reporters from local and national outlets began calling the Roswell base for details. The base's public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haut, fielded dozens of inquiries. Journalists asked about the debris, the recovery operation, and whether the military had identified the object. Haut repeated the official statement, but provided no additional information. The lack of detail increased public curiosity. Photographers and correspondents traveled to Roswell, hoping to see the debris or interview witnesses. The Roswell Daily Record published front-page stories with statements from rancher Mac Brazel and Army officers. National newspapers ran updates as the story developed. Some reporters attempted to visit the debris field, but were turned away by military police. The Army's sudden retraction added to the confusion. General Roger Ramey's press conference in Fort Worth was covered by wire services and broadcast on radio. Photographs of the supposed weather balloon debris appeared in newspapers the next day. Reporters noted the difference between the initial flying disc claim and the new explanation. Local radio station KFL attempted to interview Mac Brazel, but the Federal Communications Commission warned them not to air the recording. Other witnesses, including neighbors and base personnel, refused to speak publicly after being contacted by the military. The Army's tight control over information left journalists with unanswered questions. Despite the Army's efforts, speculation continued in private conversations and letters to newspaper editors. The rapid sequence of announcements, retractions, and restricted access fueled ongoing public interest in the Roswell incident. The media frenzy of July 1947 made the case one of the most talked about events of its time. After the initial press release, Major Jesse Marcel transported the debris from Roswell Army Airfield to Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, took charge of the situation upon Marcel's arrival. Ramey ordered the debris to be brought into his office for inspection. Photographers from the press were invited to document the material. The debris displayed on the floor included pieces of tinfoil, rubber, and thin wooden sticks. These items closely resembled parts of a standard weather balloon and its radar target, known as a Rowan device. General Ramey explained to reporters that the recovered object was not a flying disc, but rather a weather balloon used for meteorological purposes. He stated that the confusion arose from the unusual appearance of the balloon's radar reflector, which could be mistaken for something extraordinary by those unfamiliar with such equipment. Major Marcel appeared in several photographs, holding pieces of the balloon and foil. The images were published in newspapers across the country. General Ramey emphasized that the Army Air Forces had thoroughly examined the debris and found nothing unusual or threatening. He assured the public that the object posed no danger and was part of routine weather observation activities. General Ramey's staff prepared detailed statements for the press. They described the construction and purpose of weather balloons and their radar reflectors. The Army distributed these explanations to news agencies and local officials. The official story was that the incident resulted from a misidentified weather balloon, not from any advanced aircraft or foreign technology. The weather balloon explanation quickly became the accepted public version of events. The Army closed off further discussion, and no additional evidence was made available to the press. The Roswell incident faded from headlines, but questions about the true nature of the debris remained among some witnesses and researchers. Dr. Wood's UFO study at McDonnell Douglas. In 1968, Dr. Robert M. Wood began a classified study of unidentified flying objects at McDonnell Douglas, one of America's largest aerospace companies. Dr. Wood held advanced degrees in physics and engineering. He had taught at institutions such as Georgia Tech, UCLA, Caltech, and USC. The company assigned Dr. Wood to lead a small team to examine reports of UFOs and evaluate their possible implications for aerospace technology. The study was funded internally and operated under strict secrecy. Dr. Wood's team reviewed hundreds of UFO sighting reports, focusing on cases with multiple witnesses, radar confirmation, or physical evidence. The researchers analyzed government documents, military records, and technical data from incidents like the 1947 Roswell case. They examined descriptions of flight characteristics, material properties, and electromagnetic effects. In 1969, Dr. Wood brought in Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist with experience in advanced propulsion systems. Friedman contributed expertise in nuclear engineering and data analysis. Together, the team compared UFO reports with known aircraft and missile technology. They also evaluated possible explanations, including weather phenomena, experimental aircraft, and foreign technology. The McDonnell Douglas study emphasized technical details. The team constructed models of reported UFO maneuvers and estimated the energy requirements for such flight patterns. They reviewed claims of materials with unusual strength, lightness, or resilience, similar to the debris described at Roswell. The researchers considered whether new alloys or propulsion methods could explain the sightings. By 1970, Dr. Wood's team concluded that some UFO reports described real physical objects with flight characteristics beyond known technology. They recommended continued investigation and further funding. McDonnell Douglas executives declined to make the findings public or present them to Congress. Dr. Wood respected this decision and kept the study confidential. Stanton Friedman disagreed with the company's secrecy. He left McDonnell Douglas and began speaking publicly about the study's results. Friedman's work brought renewed attention to UFO research in the 1970s and 1980s. Dr. Wood continued his career in aerospace engineering, but his classified UFO study remained largely unknown outside the company for many years. Stanton Friedman was a nuclear physicist with a background in advanced propulsion systems. In 1969, he joined Dr. Wood's classified UFO study at McDonnell Douglas. Friedman's role focused on evaluating the technical plausibility of reported UFO maneuvers and propulsion methods. He analyzed witness statements, radar data, and descriptions of debris from cases such as Roswell. Friedman compared these reports to the known limits of aeronautical and nuclear technology at the time. After the study ended in 1970, Friedman left McDonnell Douglas. He disagreed with the company's decision to keep the findings secret. Friedman believed the public deserved to know about the evidence suggesting some UFOs were real. unexplained aerial objects. He began giving lectures and interviews about his research. Friedman used his scientific credentials to gain access to military records and government documents. He contacted witnesses from earlier cases and collected their testimony. In 1978, Friedman learned about the Roswell incident from radio broadcaster Bill Allen. Allen told him about Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who had handled the Roswell debris in 1947. Friedman tracked down Marcel, who described the material as lightweight, strong, and unlike anything he had seen before. Marcel also mentioned symbols on some fragments that resembled hieroglyphic. Friedman interviewed Marcel and other Roswell witnesses, including military and civilian personnel. He gathered statements about the debris, the recovery operation, and the actions taken by the Army. Friedman compared these accounts to the official explanation that the debris was from a weather balloon, later identified as part of Project Mogul. He noted inconsistencies between the witnesses' descriptions and the official story. Friedman published articles, gave public talks, and appeared on television to discuss his findings. He became widely known as the flying saucer physicist. His work brought renewed attention to the Roswell case and helped establish it as a central event in UFO research. Friedman continued to investigate and speak about UFOs for the rest of his career. The classified study led by Dr. Robert Wood at McDonnell Douglas, with Stanton Friedman as a key contributor, ran from 1968 to 1970. The team consisted of engineers, physicists, and technical analysts. They reviewed hundreds of UFO reports, focusing on cases with radar confirmation, multiple witnesses, or physical evidence. The group compared these cases to known aircraft, missile, and balloon technology. Dr. Wood's team examined the technical details of flight maneuvers described in reports. They calculated the speeds, accelerations, and turning radii claimed by witnesses. Many sightings involved objects that changed direction rapidly or hovered without visible means of support. The team noted that these maneuvers exceeded the capabilities of conventional aircraft, including jets and rockets of the late 1960s. The analysts also studied descriptions of physical debris, such as the Roswell material. They looked for known alloys or polymers that matched the reported properties: thin, lightweight, strong, and able to revert to original shape after being bent. Laboratory tests on similar materials from military and civilian sources failed to produce an exact match with the Roswell description. The team evaluated alternative explanations for the sighting. They considered misidentified weather phenomena, experimental aircraft, and foreign technology. In many cases, they found that these explanations did not account for the detailed witness statements and radar records. The group documented several incidents where military pilots and radar operators described objects that outperformed all known vehicles. By the end of the study, Dr. Wood and his team concluded that some UFO reports described real physical objects with flight characteristics beyond current technology. They recommended further investigation by qualified scientists and engineers. The final report stated that the subject deserved serious attention due to its potential implications for aerospace research and national security. McDonnell Douglas executives decided not to present the findings to Congress or the public. The study's documents were classified and stored in company archive. Stanton Friedman, however, continued to share the conclusions in his public lectures and writing. In 1978, Stanton Friedman received a tip from Bill Allen, a radio broadcaster in Louisiana. Allen told Friedman about a man named Jesse Marcel, who had been involved in the Roswell incident in 1947. Marcel was living in Houma, Louisiana, and had worked as an intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield. Allen explained that Marcel claimed to have handled debris from a crashed object that was not a weather balloon. Friedman contacted Marcel and arranged an interview. During their conversation, Marcel described the recovery of strange debris from a ranch northwest of Roswell. He explained that the material was thin, lightweight, and could not be permanently bent or broken. Marcel recalled symbols on some pieces that looked like hieroglyphics. He said the debris was unlike anything he had seen in his military career. Marcel told Friedman about the sequence of events in July 1947. He and counterintelligence officer Sheridan Cavett had visited Mac Brazel's ranch, collected the debris, and transported it to the base. Marcel stated that the material was then flown to Fort Worth, Texas, where General Roger Ramey replaced it with weather balloon parts for the press. Marcel believed the Army had covered up the true nature of the wreckage. Friedman was struck by the details in Marcel's account. He began to investigate further, seeking out other witnesses from the Roswell area. Friedman interviewed former military personnel, local residents, and journalists who had covered the story in 1947. He collected statements about the debris, the recovery operation, and the military's efforts to control information. Friedman's research led him to conclude that the Roswell incident involved more than a weather balloon. He published articles and gave lectures describing the testimony of Marcel and others. Friedman's work brought renewed public attention to the Roswell case and encouraged additional witnesses to come forward. His investigation marked the beginning of the modern Roswell UFO inquiry. Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947. He was called to investigate the debris discovered by rancher Mac Brazel near Corona, New Mexico. Marcel arrived at the site with Captain Sheridan Cavett. They surveyed a large field scattered with metallic fragments, beams, and foil-like material. Marcel collected samples of the debris. He noted the metal was extremely thin and lightweight, similar to the thickness of tinfoil. Despite its thinness, the material was very strong. Marcel tried to bend, tear, and burn the metal, but was unsuccessful. He reported that when crumpled, the metal returned to its original flat shape without any creases or damage. Some fragments included small, lightweight beam. Marcel observed unusual symbols along the inside surfaces of these beams. He described the markings as looking similar to hieroglyphics, but he could not identify the language or meaning. Marcel's son, Jesse Marcel Jr., later confirmed seeing these symbols when his father brought pieces of the debris home briefly before returning to the base. Marcel also noted the absence of any wires, rivets, or conventional fasteners in the wreckage. There were no identifiable parts such as engines, propellers, or control surfaces. The debris did not resemble any known aircraft, missile, or balloon component. Marcel stated that the material was unlike anything he had encountered in his military service. After collecting the debris, Marcel and Cavett loaded it into their vehicles and returned to Roswell Army Airfield at dusk. Marcel reported his findings to Colonel William Blanchard, the base commander. The debris was then packed and flown to Fort Worth Army Airfield for further examination by General Roger Ramey and his staff. Marcel later expressed his belief that the material was not from a weather balloon or any conventional device. His detailed descriptions became central evidence in the ongoing Roswell investigation. Several witnesses who handled the Roswell debris mentioned unusual symbols on some of the material. Jesse Marcel stated that he saw small beams with markings along their inner surfaces. He described the symbols as looking similar to hieroglyphics, with geometric shapes and line. Marcel's son, Jesse Marcel Jr., later confirmed that he also saw these markings when his father briefly brought the debris home. Marcel Jr. recalled that the symbols were purple and arranged in patterns, unlike any language he had seen in books or school. Other witnesses provided similar accounts. Sheridan Cavett, the counterintelligence officer who accompanied Marcel to the debris field, reportedly examined pieces with unusual writing. However, Cavett did not provide a public statement or detailed description. Loretta Proctor, a neighbor of Mac Brazel, said that Brazel showed her a small piece of debris with strange marking. She remembered the symbols as looking decorative, not like letters or numbers from English or Spanish. The military collected all debris with markings and secured it at Roswell Army Airfield. Officers and laboratory technicians attempted to identify the symbols. No one at the base recognized the writing or could match it to known alphabets, military codes, or foreign languages. The Army did not release photographs or tracings of the symbols to the public. In later years, researchers asked surviving witnesses to draw what they remembered. Most sketches showed repeating geometric shapes, including triangles, circles, and lines. Some witnesses described the markings as embossed or raised, while others said they were printed or stamped onto the metal. The descriptions remained consistent over decades, even as the identities of the witnesses were confirmed by independent investigators. The reports of hieroglyphic-like markings became a key point of interest for UFO researchers. The lack of any known match for the symbols added to the mystery of the Roswell debris. The military maintained its position that the material was from a weather balloon, but the unusual markings were never explained in official statements. In the weeks following the initial debris recovery, rumors began to circulate about a second crash site near Roswell. Civilian reports described military convoys and search teams moving northwest of the original debris field. Several witnesses claimed to see soldiers securing a remote area and removing large, intact wreckage. Some locals reported roadblocks and increased military patrols along rural roads leading out of town. Testimonies collected years later described the discovery of a second object, distinct from the scattered debris found by Mac Brazel. Witnesses said this object was egg-shaped or disc-shaped and largely intact. Reports mentioned that the military recovered not only additional wreckage, but also several small bodies. These bodies were described as humanoid, about 4 feet tall, with large heads and thin limbs. Witnesses said the skin appeared pale and the bodies wore tight-fitting suits. Some accounts stated the bodies had no visible ears or noses. According to these reports, the Army quickly cordoned off the second site. Soldiers removed civilians from the area and threatened them with arrest if they spoke about what they had seen. Military vehicles transported the wreckage and bodies to Roswell Army Airfield. The bodies were reportedly placed in lead-lined bags and kept under guard overnight. The next day, the remains and additional debris were loaded onto aircraft and flown to Fort Worth, then to Washington, D.C. Several witnesses said they saw large wooden crates being moved under heavy guard. Others described unusual activity at the base hospital and increased security around hangars. Some former military personnel later claimed they were ordered to remain silent about the second site and were threatened with court-martial if they discussed it. No official military documents have confirmed the existence of a second crash site. The Air Force has consistently denied all claims of recovered bodies or a second wreck. Despite this, The rumors of a second site have persisted in witness testimony and later investigations. After reports of unusual debris and possible bodies reached Roswell Army Airfield, the military increased its presence in the region. Soldiers were dispatched to both the debris field on Mac Brazel's ranch and the rumored second crash site northwest of Roswell. Military police established roadblocks and checkpoints on access roads. They stopped civilian vehicles and questioned travelers about their reasons for being in the area. Only authorized personnel were allowed beyond the barriers. At the debris field, soldiers marked the perimeter with stakes and rope. Armed guards patrolled the site around the clock. Officers supervised the collection of all visible wreckage. Teams used canvas bags and wooden crates to gather even the smallest fragments. Trucks transported the material directly to the base, where it was stored in secured hangars under guard. Witnesses later described seeing convoys of military vehicles moving through Roswell at night. The Army also secured the rumored second site. Reports from local ranchers and law enforcement described a heavy military presence. Soldiers ordered civilians to leave the area immediately. Some witnesses said they saw tarps and tents erected over portions of the ground. Others reported hearing gunfire, possibly as a warning to keep onlookers away. The military did not allow journalists or photographers near either location. Civilians who had already visited the debris field or second site were detained for questioning. Mac Brazel was held on base for several days. He was not permitted to contact his family or the press. Other witnesses were warned not to discuss what they had seen. The Federal Communications Commission contacted local radio stations and instructed them not to broadcast interviews about the incident. Military police searched the surrounding area for any remaining evidence. They interviewed residents and collected any debris that had been taken as souvenirs. Officers documented the cleanup process with written reports and photographs, but these records were not released to the public. By July 10th, most traces of the incident had been removed from both sites. The Army declared the area secure and ended active operation. After securing both sites, the Army organized the transport of all recovered materials. The debris collected from Mac Brazel's ranch was packed into several large wooden crates. Each crate was sealed and marked for classified shipment. Military police guarded the crates at all times. The crates were first loaded onto trucks and moved to Roswell Army Airfield. There, they were placed in a restricted hangar under constant surveillance. Reports from military personnel indicated that several bodies, described as small and humanoid, were also recovered from the second site. The bodies were placed in lead-lined bags. These bags were loaded into specially prepared containers and moved to the base hospital for brief examination. Medical staff at the base were ordered to remain silent about their observations. The containers with the bodies were then transferred to a secure area on the base. On July 9th, a B-29 aircraft with tail number 7300-300-01 was prepared for a classified flight. The sealed crates containing debris and the containers with bodies were loaded onto the aircraft. Military police maintained a perimeter around the plane during loading. The flight crew was briefed on the classified nature of the mission and instructed not to discuss the operation. The B-29 took off from Roswell Army Airfield and landed at Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. At Fort Worth, General Roger Ramey and his staff inspected the shipment. The debris crates were opened briefly for examination and photographs. The containers with bodies were not shown to the press or unauthorized personnel. After the inspection, the debris and bodies were repacked and prepared for further transport. Additional records indicate that the materials were sent from Fort Worth to other secure locations, including Kirtland Army Airfield and Los Alamos National Laboratory. The shipments were accompanied by armed escorts. All personnel involved were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The Army maintained strict control over the movement and storage of all evidence from the Roswell incident. After the debris and bodies were removed from Roswell, the Army focused on controlling witnesses. Military police visited civilians who had seen the crash sites or handled debris. Mac Brazel was detained at the base for several days. He was not allowed to contact his family or the press. Officers instructed Brazel to give a new statement to reporters. This revised account matched the Army's weather balloon explanation. Brazel appeared uncomfortable during interviews and avoided discussing details. Neighbors Floyd and Loretta Proctor, who had seen samples of the debris, were visited by military personnel. They were told not to speak about what they had seen. The Army warned them that discussing the incident could result in legal trouble. Other ranchers in the area received similar warning. Some were told their land would be closed to grazing if they talked to reporters. Roswell Army Airfield staff who participated in the recovery were debriefed by intelligence officers. They were ordered to remain silent about the operation. Military police reminded them that violating secrecy orders could lead to court-martial. Some enlisted men later recalled being threatened with long prison sentences if they discussed the event. Local law enforcement was also briefed. Sheriff George Wilcox and his deputies were told not to release information to the public. The Federal Communications Commission contacted Roswell radio station KFL and warned against airing interviews with witnesses. The station's management complied and did not broadcast a recorded interview with Mac Brazel. Photographer Robin Adair, sent to document the recovery, was denied access to the crash sites. He later said he was told to leave the area and not return. Reporters from the Roswell Daily Record and other newspapers were blocked from entering the secured zone. The Army's actions made it clear that secrecy was the top priority. Witnesses understood that any discussion of the incident would have consequences. The threat of punishment and loss of livelihood kept most silent for decades. After reporting the debris to Sheriff George Wilcox, Mac Brazel was escorted by military personnel to Roswell Army Airfield. He was separated from his family and held on base for several days. During this period, Brazel was kept under close watch. He was not allowed to use the telephone or contact anyone outside the base. Army officers questioned him repeatedly about the location, appearance, and amount of debris he found on his ranch. Brazel's movements were restricted. He ate meals in a guarded area and slept in a room monitored by military police. Officers took detailed notes during each interview. They asked Brazel to describe the weather conditions, the timeline of his discovery, and any unusual events he might have noticed during the storm. Brazel was pressed for information about anyone else who might have visited the site or handled the debris. While in custody, Brazel was visited by Colonel William Blanchard and intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel. They reviewed his statements and compared his account to the physical evidence collected from the ranch. Brazel was shown pieces of debris and asked to confirm their origin. The Army emphasized the importance of secrecy and warned Brazel not to discuss his experiences with anyone. During this time, local radio station KFL attempted to contact Brazel for an interview. The Federal Communications Commission warned the station not to broadcast any recordings or statements from him. Brazel's family received little information about his whereabouts. Neighbors noted his absence and the presence of military vehicles near the ranch. When Brazel was finally released, he was brought to the offices of the Roswell Daily Record for a press interview. Army officers were present during the conversation. Brazel gave a revised account of his discovery, describing the debris as consistent with a weather balloon. He avoided discussing details and appeared uncomfortable. After the interview, Brazel returned home and rarely spoke about the incident again. After Mac Brazel's release, the military and federal agencies took further steps to control the flow of information about the incident. The Federal Communications Commission contacted local radio stations, including KFLN Roswell. FCC officials warned station managers not to broadcast interviews or reports about the crash. The warning included specific instructions to withhold an interview with Mac Brazel that had already been recorded. KFL complied and did not air the material. Other local stations received similar directives. Military intelligence officers visited newsrooms and radio stations in Roswell and nearby town. They instructed editors and reporters to avoid publishing unverified details about the debris or the recovery operation. The officers emphasized the national security implications and reminded journalists of possible legal consequences for violating military order. Some reporters later said they were told their credentials could be revoked if they continued to investigate the story. At Roswell Army Airfield, all personnel involved in the recovery were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Officers held debriefing sessions to reinforce the importance of secrecy. Enlisted men were reminded that discussing the incident could result in court-martial or imprisonment. Base security was increased around hangars where debris was stored. Access was restricted to authorized personnel only. The military coordinated with law enforcement to monitor civilian witnesses. Ranchers and townspeople who had seen the crash site or handled debris were visited by Army representatives. They were told to remain silent and warned about the consequences of speaking to the media. Some were threatened with loss of grazing rights or legal action if they did not comply. The official explanation remained that the recovered material was from a weather balloon. The Army issued no further statements. All requests for additional information were denied. The combination of FCC intervention, military orders, and local enforcement effectively suppressed public discussion of the Roswell incident for many years. Blanchard and Twining's roles. Colonel William Blanchard was the commanding officer at Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947. He supervised the initial response to the debris recovery. Blanchard authorized Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett to collect material from Mac Brazel's ranch. He ordered the debris field secured and assigned military police to guard the site. Blanchard also approved the first press release announcing the recovery of a flying disc. This statement was distributed to local and national media on July 8, 1947. After the press release, Blanchard directed that all further information be handled through official channels. He coordinated with higher headquarters to ensure the material was transported to Fort Worth Army Airfield. Blanchard's actions established a chain of command for the handling of the incident. He followed standard military procedures for the recovery and transport of unidentified objects. During the cleanup operation, Blanchard reportedly took leave and was listed as being on vacation. Records show he was not present at the base for some of the final stages of the debris removal. His absence led to speculation about his involvement, but official documents confirm he delegated authority to his staff before departing. Lieutenant General Nathan Twining was the commander of Air Material Command at Wright Field, Ohio. Twining's office was responsible for the technical analysis of recovered materials. After receiving reports from Roswell, Twining altered his travel plans and flew to Alamogordo Army Airfield in New Mexico. His visit coincided with the period of increased military activity around Roswell. Twining's presence in New Mexico indicated the Air Force's high level of interest in the incident. He met with local commanders and reviewed preliminary findings. Twining later returned to Wright Field, where further analysis of the debris was conducted. His command oversaw the examination of all physical evidence collected from Roswell. Both Blanchard and Twining played key roles in the military response. Their actions ensured that the incident was handled according to established protocols and that all materials were secured for further study. General Carl Spaatz was Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force in July 1947. He was the highest-ranking officer in the Air Force at the time of the Roswell incident. Spaatz was based in Washington, D.C., but traveled frequently to Air Force installations. When the story of the recovered flying disc reached national headlines, reporters sought official comment from Spaatz and his staff. On July 8 and July 9, Spaatz was in Texas, visiting Fort Worth Army Airfield. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, briefed Spaatz on the situation. Ramey showed Spaatz the debris that had been flown in from Roswell. The material on display included tinfoil, rubber, and sticks consistent with a weather balloon. Spaatz reviewed the evidence and discussed the incident with Ramey and other senior officers. During this visit, Spaatz was approached by journalists asking for clarification about the flying disc. He told reporters that he had no knowledge of any recovered discs and stated that the Air Force had found nothing unusual. Spaatz emphasized that all recovered material had been identified as weather observation equipment. His statements were published in newspapers across the country. Spaatz instructed Air Force public information officers to maintain a consistent message. All official communications described the debris as a weather balloon or a radar reflector. The Air Force denied any connection to experimental aircraft or foreign technology. Spaatz authorized the release of technical details about weather balloons to help explain the incident to the public. Behind the scenes, Spaatz ensured that all physical evidence was transferred to appropriate military laboratories for further analysis. He ordered that all personnel involved in the recovery adhere to strict security protocols. Spaatz's public denials and private actions were coordinated to maintain secrecy and prevent further speculation. His leadership established the Air Force's official position on the Roswell incident and shaped the narrative that would persist for decades. After the debris was collected from Mac Brazel's ranch, military personnel sorted and packed the material into several large wooden crates. Each crate was sealed, labeled, and guarded by military police. The crates contained thin metallic sheets, lightweight beams, and other fragments described as unusual by those who handled them. Reports indicated that some crates also held pieces with hieroglyphic-like markings. On July 8, 1947, Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Sheridan Cavett transported the crates from the Roswell Army Airfield to the base. The material was kept in a secure hangar under constant guard. Orders were given to restrict access to the area. Only authorized officers and technical staff could enter the hangar or handle the crate. Later that day, Colonel William Blanchard ordered the debris to be flown to Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas for further examination. A B-29 aircraft with tail number 7301 was assigned to the mission. Military police maintained a perimeter around the plane during the loading process. The crates were loaded into the cargo hold under supervision from base intelligence officers. Major Marcel accompanied the flight to Fort Worth. The B-29 took off from Roswell in the afternoon and landed at Fort Worth Army Airfield that evening. Upon arrival, General Roger Ramey and his staff met the plane on the tarmac. The crates were unloaded and moved into a secure area of the base. At Fort Worth, the debris was inspected by senior officers and photographed for official records. Some of the material was displayed for the press, but only items resembling weather balloon components were shown publicly. The rest of the debris remained under military control and was not made available for civilian inspection. After the initial review, the crates were prepared for further shipment to other military facilities, including Wright Field in Ohio and laboratories at Los Alamos. Throughout the process, the chain of custody was documented, and security remained strict. The military did not release details about the contents or the results of any analysis. At Fort Worth Army Airfield, military photographers documented the debris that arrived from Roswell. Major Jesse Marcel and General Roger Ramey were photographed in Ramey's office with pieces of material laid out on the floor. The images showed tinfoil, rubber, and wooden sticks, which the Army identified as parts of a weather balloon and radar reflector. These photographs were released to the press and appeared in newspapers nationwide. The public saw only these selected items. No images of the other debris, including the pieces with unusual markings, were released. In addition to the photographs, the Federal Bureau of Investigation became involved. On July 8, 1947, the Dallas FBI office received a message from the Fort Worth Army Airfield. The message summarized the findings and described the recovered object as a disc with metallic material. The FBI memo noted that the material resembled a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector. However, the memo also stated that the Army had shipped the debris to Wright Field in Ohio for further analysis. The FBI's internal communications reflected some uncertainty about the true nature of the debris. The Dallas office relayed the Army's statements, but did not independently verify the explanation. The memo was sent to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and was marked for urgent attention. The message was later declassified and made public decades after the incident. Photographs taken at Fort Worth were examined by researchers in later years. Some investigators noted that a memo visible in one of the images mentioned the words "victims of the wreck" and "disc." This detail fueled speculation about the existence of additional evidence not shown to the press. The Army did not comment on the contents of the memo or the full range of debris photographed. The combination of official photographs and FBI messages became key sources for later investigations. They provided a limited but important record of what was publicly acknowledged and what remained classified. The military and federal agencies maintained control over the narrative and access to physical evidence. Memo mentions victims and wreck. One of the most scrutinized items from the Fort Worth press event was a memo held by General Roger Ramey. In a photograph taken on July 8, 1947, Ramey is seen holding a sheet of paper while kneeling beside the displayed debris. Text of the memo is partially visible in the image. Decades later, researchers used digital enhancement to read the contents. The memo includes the words "victims of the wreck" and references to a disc. These phrases are not found in any official press releases or public statements from the Army at the time. The memo's language led to speculation about the actual nature of the Roswell incident. The mention of victims suggested that the recovery operation may have involved more than just metallic debris. Some researchers argued that this was indirect evidence of recovered bodies at the crash site. The word wreck implied a crash rather than a simple balloon recovery. The Army never explained the memo or clarified its context. The original photograph was taken by James Bond Johnson, a staff photographer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. The negative was stored in the newspaper's archives and later examined by independent analysts. The enhanced images were presented at UFO conferences and published reports. The Army did not respond to requests for the original memo or further documentation. The existence of the memo became a focal point for investigators. It was cited in books, articles, and documentaries as a potential clue to the classified aspects of the Roswell case. The military maintained that all materials shown in Fort Worth were from a weather balloon. No official report addressed the language found in the memo. The reference to victims and wreck in a document held during the public display of debris remains one of the unresolved details in the Roswell file. It continues to be discussed by researchers seeking to understand what happened in New Mexico in July 1947. Over the decades, numerous testimonies and affidavits have emerged regarding the Roswell incident. Some of these accounts were given by direct participants, while others came from second-hand sources or were collected years after the events. The reliability of these statements has been a subject of ongoing debate among historians and investigators. Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who handled the debris, gave several interviews later in life. He described the material as unique and not from any known aircraft or balloon. However, records show that Marcel overstated his military rank and credentials in some accounts. He claimed to be a pilot and to hold a physics degree. But official documents confirm he was not a pilot and did not have a physics degree. A diary attributed to Marcel was later proven not to be in his handwriting. Colonel William Blanchard, the base commander, was reported to have been involved in the recovery and cleanup. Military records indicate that Blanchard was on vacation during the final stages of the operation and not present at the base. His direct involvement remains unconfirmed. Walter Haut, the public information officer who issued the original press release, signed an affidavit in the 2000s stating he saw both debris and alien bodies. However, this affidavit was written by a UFO author and not independently verified. Haut's earlier public statements did not mention bodies or a second crash site. Mortician Glenn Dennis claimed to have spoken with a nurse who saw alien bodies at the base hospital. Investigators later found that the nurse named in his account did not exist. Dennis' story could not be substantiated by any official records or other witnesses. Colonel Thomas Dubose, who appeared in the Fort Worth photographs, confirmed that the debris shown to the press was not the original material from Roswell. He stated that the real debris had already been shipped to higher headquarters before the press event. These disputed testimonies and affidavits have complicated efforts to establish a clear account of the Roswell incident. Researchers continue to examine official records and witness statements to separate fact from speculation. In 1994, the United States Air Force began a new review of the Roswell incident. The Secretary of the Air Force directed investigators to examine all available records, including classified documents, flight logs, and technical reports from 1947. The goal was to address public questions and clarify the official explanation. The Air Force's first report, released in 1995, reaffirmed that the debris recovered in July 1947 came from Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a top-secret program that used high-altitude balloons to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The report included photographs and technical descriptions of Mogul balloon trains, radar reflectors, and related equipment. Investigators compared these materials to witness descriptions of the Roswell debris, such as thin metal, foil, and lightweight beams. In 1997, the Air Force released a follow-up report addressing claims of recovered alien bodies. This report concluded that witnesses who described seeing small humanoid figures were likely recalling events involving anthropomorphic crash test dummies. These dummies were used in a series of high-altitude balloon tests conducted in New Mexico during the 1950s. Several years after the Roswell incident, the dummies were designed to study the effects of high-altitude ejection and parachute descent on the human body. They were about 6 feet tall, dressed in flight suits, and equipped with sensors and identification tags. The Air Force report stated that memories of these later tests may have merged with earlier events in the minds of some witnesses. The report also addressed rumors of military ambulances, recovery teams, and unusual activity at area hospitals by attributing them to routine operations or unrelated accidents. The Air Force concluded that no evidence supported the recovery of extraterrestrial craft or bodies at Roswell. The official position remained that the debris was from a classified balloon project, and that reports of alien bodies were misidentifications or later fabrication. The Air Force published its findings and made supporting documents available for public review. Jesse Marcel played a central role in the Roswell incident. He was the intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947. Marcel was responsible for collecting and analyzing the debris found on Mac Brazel's ranch. He escorted the material back to the base and later accompanied it to Fort Worth Army Airfield. In the years following the incident, Marcel gave multiple interviews describing his involvement and the nature of the debris. In his later statements, Marcel claimed to have held the rank of lieutenant colonel during the Roswell recovery. Official military records show that Marcel was a major at the time. He did not receive a promotion to lieutenant colonel until several years later. Marcel also stated that he was a pilot. Personnel files confirm that Marcel was not trained or certified as a pilot. His duties at Roswell involved intelligence, analysis, and security, not flight operation. Marcel claimed to hold a degree in physics. Investigators reviewed his educational background. Records show that Marcel attended Louisiana State University, but did not graduate or earn a physics degree. His military training focused on intelligence and ordnance rather than advanced science. Despite this, Marcel often presented himself as a scientist in interviews and public appearances. A diary attributed to Marcel surfaced in later years. Some researchers believed it contained personal notes from the time of the Roswell incident. Handwriting analysis determined that the diary was not written by Marcel. The document was produced by another individual and did not contain first-hand information about the recovery operation. Marcel's exaggerations have complicated the historical record. His detailed accounts of the debris and recovery operation remain important to researchers. However, the inconsistencies in his credentials have led some investigators to question the accuracy of his statements. Official records confirm Marcel's role as an intelligence officer, but not as a pilot or physicist. These facts are now included in most serious studies of the Roswell case. In the years following the Roswell incident, rumors began to circulate about the fate of possible alien occupants. Some witnesses claimed that not all of the bodies recovered from the crash sites were dead. These accounts stated that at least one being survived the initial impact. The earliest mention of a surviving alien appeared in local conversations in the late 1940s. But no official records confirmed this detail. By the 1980s, books and interviews began to include more elaborate stories. Several civilian and former military sources told researchers that a living creature had been found at one of the crash sites. Descriptions of the being were consistent. About 4 feet tall, with a large head, thin limbs, pale skin, and large eyes. Witnesses said the being was taken from the site under heavy guard and transported to Roswell Army Airfield. According to these accounts, the living occupant was kept in a secure room at the base hospital. Medical staff were reportedly ordered not to speak about the incident. Some versions of the story claim that doctors attempted to treat the being's injuries, but were unable to communicate with it. The military allegedly transferred the survivor to another facility within days. Rumors persisted that the being was sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory, which was already a high-security site for atomic research. Stories circulated that the alien lived in isolation at Los Alamos until 1952. No official documentation or photographs have ever been produced to support these claims. The Air Force has consistently denied that any living beings were recovered or transported from Roswell. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the rumors of a surviving alien became a recurring theme in UFO literature and documentaries. Researchers have interviewed dozens of individuals who repeated the story, but none have provided verifiable proof. The tale of a surviving alien remains one of the most persistent and controversial aspects of the Roswell case.